I'm Kent Edwards. I'm the Sustainability Officer for the City of Delray Beach, and really appreciate the turnout for Climate and Art presentations here at the Arts Warehouse. The presentation that I'm going to be giving now is on the city's Green Building Ordinance. This is a very important step towards sustainability and also addressing climate change. So the points that I'm going to touch on today really goes through the process of how we passed a green building ordinance. This is a nuts and bolts kind of talk. There's going to be a lot of detail about the obstacles that we faced. I've had interactions with quite a few of my counterparts, and since green buildings are more efficient and they reduce greenhouse gases, we think that this is a tool that can be really useful. So, starting off background, back in 2009, there was a group of private individuals. This was not a city initiative. They got together and formed a task force. They wrote a report that is still on the city's website. It was very extensive with multiple recommendations, including the writing of a green building ordinance. It took until 2015 and an ordinance was passed. That ordinance is still in effect, and it dealt with the central business district, which is about 20% of the city or so. It was for buildings of 50,000 square feet or greater, and it was at a silver LEED level or equivalent. And that equivalent language is something that I'm going to talk about quite a bit going forward. In 2019, our Green Board Okay. In 2019, our Green Board, which was formed out of another recommendation from the Green Task Force, made a recommendation to the City Commission that green building ordinance be revised so that it would expand to the whole city, that it would address all buildings of 5,000 square feet and larger, and that it would require a gold LEED or equivalent level of certification. The Commission supported that and gave direction for staff to work, and I came on board actually with the city in May of 2020, and that was one of the projects that I was assigned when I came on board. In the meantime, as a normal course per Florida law, comprehensive plans are required by all counties and all municipalities. So the regular cycle of revision we had in February of 2020, that comprehensive plan revised was adopted, and throughout there are dozens of recommendations that are consistent with sustainability and also with green buildings, because they are good for our future. They're a better kind of construction. So we have, as one of our guides in the comprehensive plan, support for green buildings. Then in February 2021, staff had gotten together, put together a draft. I learned actually that we had to stick to the direction that we had been given in drafting the ordinance, because honestly, even though I'm very pro-environment and have devoted my career to that, I saw as a big change moving to a 5,000 square feet, moving to a gold requirement. It is important to work with the community. The regulated community is very important to have them on board. So we had those discussions, and it took us, some time through 2020 to get the draft together. We started our public meetings. You can see here there were 6 that we went to. All of these were publicly noticed. All of these groups were in favor of the green building ordinance and ultimately voted to support. But even within these very pro-green building groups, there were concerns that were addressed. So some of the smaller developments, single-family residents and smaller developments, there were suggestions maybe to go to a lower certification level because Gold level, usually there's going to have to be some design changes. There may be some cost associated with that. And at a lower level of certification, you still get a lot of the benefits, and it might be that intermediate step. Thank you, Ditmar. And then also a lot of suggestions for use of incentives, and I'll talk about that later. We had one public meeting with the Downtown Development Authority on April of 2021, where they did not vote in support of the ordinance. There were comments where the members were generally in favor of green buildings, which it really is smart. I mean, it comes down to how we do it, not a question of whether green buildings are a good thing. So they were generally in favor, but they had some very specific concerns, and this square foot threshold level, again, was brought up. A phasing requirement would give time and take smaller steps for putting the ordinance in place, and also go out and give more stakeholder input. And so for me, having already made multiple presentations, you can never do enough public outreach. The uncertainty that comes up from not knowing the details that are actually in the ordinance can really be a problem. So involving all of the affected parties is really, really important. But on July 6, 2021, we went to commission for the first time in first reading. The way Delray Beach government runs at the first reading, there is no presentation. It is really a step to let the public know that this is being considered. So there was not a whole lot of discussion at that time, even on the commission. We came back for second reading on August 10th, and a lot of concerns were voiced by the commission. A lot of the same ones that we had heard from the community, and direction was given to do more outreach with the community. And really at that point, I felt that we were on a good track, because I thought that we could change the ordinance, and I really was hopeful that we'd be able to come up with something that was very beneficial and also would be accepted by all of the public. So on October 14th, we had an outreach meeting that was well attended. There were about 30 different parties that came to that. They were from all different parts of the community. One commissioner was there, multiple developers were there, multiple people from the general community and NGO were there. So it really was a good example of communication on this topic. A lot of the same concerns that we had heard during other public meetings were voiced. So cost was and is voiced a lot of times as a major concern. And I'd like to just say, a way to reduce the differential in the cost is actually to look at lower levels of certification. So another comment that we had about going to lower level of certification that really was consistent and would answer a concern. Again, the single family residents and smaller developments were addressed. Historical developments were brought up, and really historical homes and buildings, they already are sustainable because they maintain materials that are still there, along with all of the cultural aspects that come from historical buildings. So that was a comment that I saw as being something that we could and should address. A lot of comments about the threshold level being at 15,000 and 20,000 from multiple people. We heard those specific numbers, raising where the ordinance would kick in from rather than 5,000 to at least the 15,000. And using tiers and incentives. Again, tiers are you can do that in different ways. Different kinds of development, different square footages, and phasing would be over a period of time. And the concept there is, let's get people used to this ordinance. People want to support green building, but it needs to be done in a way that really works. So even though the vote ultimately was to not support by the Downtown Development Authority, I saw these kinds of things as being something that would address those concerns and hopefully get them on board. Then in December 14th, we did a status update for the commission, really talked about a lot of the things that I already have. There was generally a favorable review of that and asked us to continue outreach to the community. And this is a slide about the concern of equivalency that was addressed. And here I can refer to the ordinance that was passed in 2015. It had language in it that said silver or equivalent. But even though we were coming forward with the exact same language, there was a tremendous amount of question, and frankly, I got at least dozens of comments of, why are you making us get a LEED certification when there are so many other programs out there? So this equivalency matrix I took to the status update for the commission, and I have another slide later where I simplified this. I really wish I had taken this whole top part out and gotten rid of the residential, because the only difference between the two is the National Green Building Standard. And so my point here is that simplifying that message on a really complicated topic is something that is really, really important to do. This was complete, this was honest, and I tend to want to give that kind of information, but it could have been simplified and gone over better. So from January to March of 2022, I met with a lot of individuals and small groups of individuals that are interested, really from a different range, including the development community. And I got input from them. And in March of 2022, we had another public outreach meeting. And I have to really give a big thank you to the Florida Green Building Coalition and the National Green Building Standard from their national office. These were virtual presentations, but from their national offices, each of them had a representative on. And from local South Florida, there was a certifier. That was one of their best, the highest level of certifier and experience that come from them. We had presentations, and of course I gave a background on the ordinance, but each of these programs went into detail on what is the processes, what are the steps, what is the cost comparison. They showed the forms, they talked about the different kinds of credits, and really had a good documentation on these are not really difficult programs to get through. It is difficult from the standpoint of design. You need to have features in that are green, but the process is so much simpler than LEED. These are good options for those smaller developments and single-family residences. The National Green Building Standard, for example, was written specifically for residential kinds of development. And in my opinion, we really need to be hitting on all sectors, raising awareness and taking steps towards being more sustainable and reducing our greenhouse gases. So this particularly was a certification program that lowered concerns for developers in that residential sector. We also talked again about cost. And the lower levels of certification, especially the lowest entry level, is very similar to what is required in the Florida building code. And there have been questions about, well, the certification requirement isn't going to help very much. And that could be true, but I believe in market processes. There aren't a whole lot of places that have a requirement for any kind of green building certification at all. If we can take that first step and actually have the documentation of a green building, then let the business take over. Well, we can give you a better product than that other developer there. They're just going to give you a certified level. We can give you a silver. So if we open up the door and have smart government that works with all of the sectors, at least take a step forward, then we can address even concerns about cost. And the FGBC and NGBS costs associated with just the certification part, not the construction, but the certification, application fees, sign-off fees, they're very, very low. So you can have a better structure and one that has a third party that has looked at it. In addition to the builder and the city building department, you have a third party that's going in there to certify it also. So you have a higher quality with virtually no difference in cost. All right, then in July, I went back and gave another status update to the commission, and one of the priorities for the Green Board was the Green Building Ordinance and greenhouse gases. So in association with an annual report there, we talked about the Green Building Ordinance. The commission reaffirmed that they wanted that ordinance to come back to them. And so staff got together, put all of the information that I've talked about this far together, and had an ordinance that went to first reading on October 11th in 2022. And then November 1st was the second reading. And the draft ordinance had a additional tier added that had 15,000 to 50,000 square foot of building. This is throughout the city. So that would be a big step forward over the previous ordinance. Rather than just the central business district, we were going to the whole city. And we were dropping down to a 15,000 to 50,000 square feet. Those buildings were just the minimum level of certification, so it was an easy step. It really was just a documentation for a lot of builders to be able to say that they got this minimum level of certification. We took the existing requirement of 50,000 and larger square feet at a silver level, and we expanded that to the whole city. So we're really looking at having a lot more familiarity and Delray Beach becoming a center for green buildings. The ordinance did not apply to historic buildings and renovations. Again, these are sustainable already in many cases, and in a renovation, there's a lot of complication at times in determining whether an ordinance would apply. We may be able to address that in the future, but for this first step, it was taken out. Having an effective date in the future is really critical. A lot of development starts at least 2 years in the planning and the finance phases, sometimes even more than that. So to give the development community really a fair chance to be able to be in compliance with this ordinance, we needed to have that lead time of a year. We also had a requirement for reevaluation. So the items that we got comments on, like incentives that were going to take more time, well, we added into the ordinance a mechanism for us to be able to do that. And actually, in the ordinance that went to commission, it had a 4-year time frame. Based on commission comment, we reduced it to 2, which is really an improvement. And we made it clear that the ordinance applies to city projects. That is a Florida statute requirement, but some other items that weren't huge changes, they were incorporated into the ordinance already, but rather than use the equivalent language that I talked about, we actually referenced all 3 of the other green building certification programs. And when I was building this equivalency matrix, this is what it came down to in the final presentation. I actually got documentation from each of the 4 certifying agencies that they believe that this was the strongest consistency or equivalency. At the higher levels, the program's requirements are a little bit different, so there's more disagreement on the equivalency. But when you start at the entry level or at the next level up, silver, then there is a lot more equivalency, and all of the certifying agencies agreed with that. So they were really on board and supporting us. Even had one of the programs that came to commission meeting and was in support of the ordinance. And I talked a bit about the the levels already. So to repeat, effects and future considerations, the requirements are for the whole city. The new tier really is going to add on more buildings. That's at the 15,000 to 50,000. Going whole city is going to raise that number. Suggestions for EV and solar ready will be able to look at what other places are doing, because there are quite a few ordinances that are addressing that. I have heard from my colleagues where they have had some problems with wording of that and getting through the public meetings. We have time to gather that information. Incentives really fall into a couple of different categories. One of them is reduced application fees or rebates. Well, that's a budget consideration, and we're still coming out of the pandemic, and we don't know exactly what would be the best way to address those budget considerations, and the budget process is complicated in and of itself. Otherwise, there's a expediting of processing. Well, the city is going through a movement from a paper to an e-permit process. So to add on to that some kind of an incentive with speed of processing, we just, we're not in the position to really be able to do that. We still can in the future because we've made progress on our e-permit. But we have time to take a look at that during this reevaluation period, and we have time to do more outreach in the coming year to make sure that people are informed and behind the green building ordinance. This Florida statute 255.2575 is the one that says all governmental buildings pretty much have to have some kind of green certification. Well, our ordinance puts some more detail onto that, and it is consistent. We have made a commitment for no increase in processing time because the ordinance as written, people should be able to comply with, and the documentation process for submittal to the city is really minimum. And I have had contact from a lot of different municipalities. I've made presentations. I have a presentation in a couple of weeks to a board down in Sunrise. So we're really hoping that we can start showing people how to do this very, very good thing, working with the development community, with the NGOs, and make a difference in South Florida. And the difference that we're making is related to greenhouse gases. I am at the end of today, I have a presentation on our greenhouse gas inventory and our climate action plan. And in the inventory that we did, we found that buildings, both commercial and residential, account for about 44% of the emissions in Delray Beach. So if we are going to meet our reduction goals of 50% in 7 years, we really need to have mechanisms to address our buildings and make them more efficient. And there's all kinds of overlap between green building certification and greenhouse gas emissions that make a better building and also a more efficient one that costs less to run and conserves materials. And they're healthier. And with that, the commission voted 5-0 on November 1st of 2022, and the ordinance goes into effect on November 1st of 2023. If you have questions, I'll be happy to take them.